Hey, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Excited to be here.
Today, we're going to tackle something that can really trip up us language learners.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially those of us using fantastic resources like Pronunciator to really dive into a new language.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the Spanish verbs ser and estar.
Yes.
Which both mean to be in English.
Right.
And, you would think, how complicated can it be? It's just to be.
One verb, you got it, easy peasy.
But as anyone who's dipped their toes into the Spanish language knows, it gets a little more nuanced than that, shall we say.
Yes, definitely.
So we're going to do a deep dive today on those two verbs, ser and estar.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about this is that we rely so heavily on that one little verb, to be, in English, to do so much.
Right.
And Spanish kind of like draws a line in the sand and says, nope, we're splitting that up into two verbs and here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and what's fascinating too is that it's not just as simple as like, permanent versus non-permanent, although that is like a key distinction.
Right.
It's like it speaks to a fundamentally different way of looking at states of being.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think a good place to start, I know that the Pronunciator app probably gets into this a little bit, but just to reiterate for our listeners.
Yeah.
You use ser when you're talking about something that's like lasting, something that's like part of the very essence of a person or a thing.
Exactly.
So like he is tall, like that's ser.
Yeah.
Like that's an inherent quality of that person.
Exactly. You wouldn't say he is being tall today.
Right.
He is tall. That is a characteristic.
And it's also used for like, I believe nationality, right?
Yes. Origins, where you're from, your family relationships, those are all with ser as well, because those are all seen as kind of permanent states of being.
Right, because even if you move, you're still from that place.
Exactly.
But then you get to estar, which is where it gets a little bit more, I think, slippery for English speakers.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where it gets fun, I think.
Yeah.
Because estar is all about those temporary states of being.
Okay.
So thinking about like how you're feeling right now, are you feeling good?
Right.
Or how something tastes, or if something is cold.
Ooh, I have a great estar story.
Okay.
Because I was, this is many years ago now. My Spanish is a little bit better now, thank goodness. But I was in Spain.
Okay.
And I was trying to order a coffee, and I wanted an iced coffee.
Okay.
And I knew the word for cold, and I thought I was really clever, and I put together my sentence.
Yeah.
And I used ser instead of estar.
Oh, no.
And the waiter looked at me like I had grown a second head.
And that's such a perfect example, though, because with ser, it's like you're saying this coffee is fundamentally, inherently, in its essence, a cold coffee.
Yes.
Whereas estar, you're saying this coffee is in a state of coldness.
Yes, at this moment.
Right.
At this moment. It might change later.
Exactly.
But right now, it's cold.
It's cold, yeah.
And that's where, like you were saying, it gets a little bit tricky because you really have to think about what is the essence of this thing that I'm trying to describe?
Yes.
And how do I convey that properly?
It's so interesting, too, because I feel like, if I'm using an app like Pronunciator and I'm like going through and I'm like, practicing my Spanish,
Yeah.
I think I would find it very helpful to kind of keep this in mind as I'm like going through, I'm like, like describing people. Like if I'm describing someone's personality, like they are funny, they are kind, that's ser. But if I'm describing like, how are they at this moment? Are they tired? Are they frustrated? That's estar.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about, I think, language learning is it really does force you to think about like even those subtle nuances of meaning that you might not even think about in your native language.
And native Spanish speakers will even debate sometimes, like, which one is more appropriate to use in this situation? Because it really can be very nuanced.
Right. Like there are some things that are just clear cut, and there are some things where it's like, well, it kind of depends.
Exactly.
How do you really want to...
Depends on the meaning you're trying to convey.
Yes, exactly.
And that's, I think, what's so fun about it.
It's almost like, I'm trying to think of like a visual analogy. It's almost like ser is like the background of the painting.
Oh, I like that.
It's like these are the permanent things, and then estar is like these are the details that you're adding in to really bring the scene to life.
Yes, I love that. I love that analogy.
Just how I kind of see it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I like that.
Well, this has been really, really interesting.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. So to our listeners out there, keep this in mind. As you are using your Pronunciator app,
yes,
and as you're kind of making your way through the world of the Spanish language,
And don't get discouraged if it seems tricky at first.
Yes.
It really does just take practice.
It clicks eventually.
It does. It does. It took me a while.
And when it does, like, oh, it's like this whole other level of, fluency that opens up.
Exactly. It's like this little key that unlocks so much more of the language.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think what's, just to leave our listeners with a thought.
Yeah.
We've been talking about ser and estar,
Mm-hmm.
but do you think as English speakers we could benefit from having those two different verbs? Like when you think about your own language now, after having this conversation, can you start to see where maybe those subtle distinctions could be made even in English?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, it makes you think, right?
And it's something I'm definitely going to be thinking about.
Me too.
As I'm going throughout my day.
And maybe you can impress some Spanish speakers.
I'm going to try and work it into my daily life.
I know. This coffee is cold.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to work it in there. I'm going to try.
That's great.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for diving into this with me today.
Of course. It's been a pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, keep up the fantastic work on your Spanish.
Yes, keep it up.
And we will catch you next time for another deep dive.
See you later.